He had survived 2 wars, a hostage extraction in the dark of a Yemeni desert, and the kind of cold that turned a man's fingers black at the tips. What he could not survive, it turned out, was a 50-pound dog with a torn ear and a bad habit of sitting directly on his feet. But that came later. First, there was the silence. Virgil Cane had wanted the silence, had driven 6 hours north from Pensacola to find it, up through Alabama and into the Tennessee hill country, where the roads narrowed and the cell signal dropped to nothing. And the only sounds at night were the creek behind the property line, and whatever lived in the tree line beyond it. He'd paid cash for the land. A former hunting cabin, 2 rooms, a wood stove that leaked smoke when the wind came from the east. The realtor had apologized for the condition. Virgil had told her it was fine. He hadn't been lying. The cabin suited him the way a hole suits something that wants to disappear. He was 53 years old. He had been a Navy SEAL for 22 years, and in that time he had learned to sleep in 4-hour rotations, eat whatever was available, and trust the instincts of the man beside him more than his own eyes. He had also learned, somewhere along the way, to stop talking about the things that mattered. It was a useful skill in combat. Less useful in a marriage. His wife Lorena had said that once, quietly, on a Tuesday evening in their kitchen in Virginia Beach, while she was folding laundry and he was reading a mission report he wasn't supposed to bring home. She hadn't said it unkindly. That was the part that stayed with him. Lorena had died 14 months ago. Aneurysm, fast and without warning, the way she had always preferred things. The doctor said she likely felt nothing. Virgil chose to believe that. He did not cry at the funeral. He did not cry afterward. He loaded the pickup and drove north and bought a cabin, where the nearest neighbor was a retired schoolteacher named Francis. Wait, no, a retired schoolteacher named Audrey, 3 miles down the road, who left a jar of preserved peaches on his porch in September and never once knocked on the door. He appreciated that more than he could say. He chopped wood. He fixed the smoke problem with the stove. He learned which corner of the creek held trout and which direction the deer came from in the early morning. He read. He slept badly but quietly, which was its own kind of mercy. For 8 months the silence held. Then a dog appeared on his porch. She was a German shepherd, older, maybe 7 or 8 years, with one ear that had been torn at some point and healed crooked. She was thin in the way that meant she had been thin for a long time. Not the kind of thin that happens over a few bad weeks. Her coat was dull along the spine. She had found her way up the porch steps and was sitting in front of his door with the patient, particular stillness of an animal that had decided something. Virgil opened the door at 5:45 in the morning, coffee in hand, and found her there. He said nothing for a moment. She looked at him. She did not bark, did not whine, did not perform the usual anxious greeting of a lost dog. She simply looked at him the way a person looks at someone they have been waiting for. "No," he said. He stepped around her, walked to the end of the porch, drank his coffee, and looked at the tree line. When he turned back, she had moved exactly 6 inches to remain facing him. I said no. She blinked. He went inside. She was still there at noon and at dusk, and the following morning. He put a bowl of water out because it was 90 degrees and he was not, whatever else he was, the kind of man who let an animal die of thirst within arm's reach. He told himself that was the end of it. It was not the end of it. On the 3rd day, he drove the 40 minutes into town and asked at the feed store if anyone had reported a missing shepherd. No one had. He drove to the county shelter, a small cinder-block building with a hand-lettered sign, and described her. The woman at the desk checked her records, shook her head, and told him that if he brought the dog in, she'd likely be put down within 5 days. They were at capacity. Had been since spring. Virgil drove home. The dog was on the porch. He stood in the driveway for a long moment, looking at her. There was something about her he did not want to look at directly. Something in the set of her head and the patience of her waiting that reminded him of qualities he associated with the best people he had known. The ones who did not flinch, the ones who stayed. His last working dog, a Malinois named Blaze, had been killed during an extraction op in 2019. An IED, secondary device, the kind designed specifically to catch the rescue team. Virgil had been 20 feet away. He had not talked about Blaze to anyone. He did not talk about him now. He simply recognized, standing in his own driveway in the Tennessee hills, that he did not want a dog, and that he particularly did not want one who looked at him like that. He went inside and heated up soup and did not feed her from the table. But he did put a second bowl of water out, and when the temperature dropped below 50 that night, which he had not expected for September, he opened the door at 2 in the morning and found her standing at the threshold, not pushing, not whining, just standing there in the dark, as though she had simply decided to wait in the cold and trust that someone would eventually notice. He moved aside. She came in, walked to the rug in front of the wood stove, turned once, and lay down. Temporary, he said, to the room, to himself, to whatever was listening. She was asleep inside of 4 minutes. He stood there in the dark for a while, looking at her. Then he went back to bed and slept, for the first time in several months, without waking up at 3 in the morning, certain that something was wrong. He named her Remy. He did not intend to. He woke up on the 4th morning and found her sitting beside his bed looking at him, and said, without thinking, "Remy," and that was that. Names had a way of making things permanent whether you wanted them to or not. Remy had preferences. She preferred the left side of the wood stove to the right. She preferred to eat slowly, and without an audience, so he learned to set her bowl down and leave the kitchen. She preferred the early morning, the hour before full light when the birds started up, and the mist was still on the water, and she would sit beside him on the porch steps during that hour with a seriousness that Virgil found, to his great surprise, companionable. She did not need to be entertained. She did not need reassurance. She seemed perfectly content to exist alongside him, without requiring that he perform wellness or happiness or any of the things the world had kept asking of him since Lorena died. The grief counselor the VA had recommended, the phone calls from his team sergeant asking how he was holding up, his sister in Phoenix who emailed every 2 weeks and always ended with "let me know if you need anything," and what Virgil always needed was for everyone to stop asking. Remy didn't ask. She just showed up every morning and sat beside him and watched the light come over the ridge, and something in that, in the simple animal fact of being witnessed without being assessed, began to do something to the locked and saltwater-rusted mechanisms inside him. He would not have called it healing. He was not the kind of man who used that word. But he started sleeping through the night. He started cooking actual meals instead of eating crackers over the sink. He drove into town one Saturday and stopped, without planning to, at the small diner on the main street, and ordered eggs and coffee, and sat at the counter, and said good morning to the man beside him, a farmer by the look of his hands, and they talked about nothing important for 20 minutes, and when Virgil got back in the truck, he sat for a moment with the engine idling, and could not have explained why his chest felt strange. He went home and took Remy for a long walk up through the meadow to the ridge. This was October. In November, things changed. He had taken to letting Remy run loose on the property in the mornings, which she seemed to appreciate but never abused. She had a natural boundary instinct. She did not go into the road. She did not chase the deer past the fence line. She operated, as far as Virgil could tell, on some internal code of conduct that he respected without being able to explain. On the second Tuesday of November, she did not come back from her morning run at the usual time. Virgil waited 20 minutes before he acknowledged the feeling in his chest. He would describe it later, to himself only as cold. Not fear. Something below fear. The particular temperature of losing someone again. He went looking. The property backed up against a narrow ravine, maybe 40 feet deep, carved out over centuries by a branch of the creek that ran hard in spring. It was crossable if you knew where, impassable if you didn't. Virgil had fenced the far edge of his property, but not the ravine itself, which he had judged too steep to matter. He found Remy at the edge, not in it. She was standing at the lip of the drop, very still, looking down. He heard, a moment later, the sound she had been standing over. A dog, male, young, maybe a year old, some kind of mixed shepherd cross, black and tan, wedged against a root system about 15 feet down where the ravine narrowed. His back left leg was at a bad angle. He had been there a while. His voice, when it came, was the worn-out sound of an animal that had been calling for a long time and had almost stopped believing anyone would answer. Virgil looked at Remy. She looked back at him. "You led me here," he said. It was not a question. He drove into town, borrowed a harness and 2 lengths of rope from the feed store owner. A man named Don who asked no questions and offered no commentary, and came back and went down into the ravine the way he had once gone into places he could not entirely see. The young dog was frightened and in pain and bit him twice in the process of being secured, which Virgil understood completely. He got him up and out and laid him on the truck bed and drove to the vet in Millard, the next town over. The vet's name was Dr. Okafor. She was brisk and competent and told him the leg was broken in 2 places and would need surgery and would he be authorizing treatment. Virgil looked at the dog on the table. The dog looked back. Yes, Virgil said. He called the dog Drifter because that was what he was. Dr. Okafor could find no chip, no registration. She put notices up. No one called. By the time the dog was healed and ready to leave the clinic, 3 weeks later, Virgil had already quietly rearranged the furniture to accommodate a second animal. He brought Drifter home on a gray December afternoon. Remy met them at the porch steps. She sniffed Drifter with the thorough, dispassionate professionalism of a customs inspector, then stepped aside and went back inside. Drifter stood in the doorway for a moment, testing the air, testing the silence. Then he walked in and lay down 6 inches from Remy, not touching but close. Virgil stood in his own doorway and looked at the 2 of them and felt something so unfamiliar it took him a long moment to identify it. He was glad. Not just okay. Not just functional. Actually glad, in the specific light way of something that has been in the dark for a long time and turned toward a window. He sat in the armchair by the wood stove and watched the fire. Remy lifted her head and looked at him once and then went back to sleep. Drifter was already gone, breathing the deep, even breath of something that had finally found a place to land. Virgil thought about Lorena, not the absence of her, not the hole she had left, which was what he had been thinking about for 14 months. He thought about her actual self, the way she made coffee too strong and refused to apologize for it. The way she had always called him by his full name when she was serious and Virg when she was teasing. The way she would have looked at these 2 dogs in his living room and said something very dry and very accurate that would have made him laugh. He thought she would have liked this. The cabin, the ridge. The way the light came in the east windows in the morning. He thought she would have liked Remy. The thought did not break him. That was new. December became January. January in the Tennessee hills was serious and gray, and Virgil found he did not mind it. He had the stove and the 2 dogs and a shelf of books he was working through with the methodical patience that was perhaps his oldest habit. He had started driving into town more often, not because he needed anything, but because Dawn at the feed store had turned out to be interesting in a low-key, undemanding way, and because the woman who ran the hardware store, a former schoolteacher named Bertie, had strong opinions about things that were interesting to argue with. He was becoming, without quite deciding to, a person who was part of a place. It was not what he had planned when he bought the cabin. He had planned to disappear. Instead, something had found him and refused to let him. He thought about that sometimes. In the early mornings on the porch, Remy on one side and Drifter on the other, the coffee going cold in his hands because he had forgotten to drink it. He was not a man who used words like meant or fate. He had spent too many years in places where fate was indifferent and random and took the best people first. He did not believe the universe was organized around his comfort, but he also could not entirely explain Remy showing up on his porch. Could not explain the specific morning she had led him to the ravine, or the specific nature of what he had felt when he pulled that young dog up out of the dark. He did not try to explain it. He let it be what it was. In February, he called his sister in Phoenix for the first time since Christmas. She answered on the second ring and went quiet in the way people go quiet when they are trying not to show how relieved they are. He told her about the cabin, the ridge, the creek in the mornings. He told her about Remy and about Drifter, and about the time Drifter had eaten an entire uncooked sweet potato and then acted like he was being falsely accused. His sister laughed. Virgil listened to her laugh, his feet up on the porch rail, the February cold, sharp, and clear, both dogs pressed against his legs for warmth or solidarity or whatever dogs have instead of solidarity. He thought, this is what it feels like to have something to say. He had not had something to say in a very long time. He didn't tell her about Lorena, not tonight. There would be time for that. He was learning, slowly, at 53 years old, that some things could be approached in stages rather than all at once or not at all, that doors didn't have to be flung open, that they could be eased a little at a time until the light got through. Remy shifted against him and put her chin on his knee. He put his hand on her crooked ear, the torn one that had healed sideways, and he felt the old bones of her skull under his palm, warm and solid and entirely real. He kept talking to his sister. The creek ran in the dark below the property line. The tree line stood black against the blue-black sky. Somewhere out in the meadow something moved, deer probably, or fox, the ordinary wild business of the night going on without any help from him, which was, he thought, exactly as it should be. He had come here to disappear. Instead, he had been found, twice, in 2 different ways, by 2 animals who had nowhere else to go and had chosen him anyway, with the particular and inexplicable certainty of things that know more than they should. He would not call it healing. He was still not that kind of man. But he was on the porch. He was on the phone. He was present in his own life in a way he had not been in longer than he wanted to count, and the night was cold, and both dogs were warm, and his sister was still talking, and he was listening, and for now, for tonight, that was enough.